joining, for those who just came. I think there's no new faces you already know about the film, so I'm not going to repeat myself from earlier. But we should do a proper introduction of the two of us, and then the idea is that we're going to have a little talk where I'm going to ask you some questions, and then we're going to invite your questions and contributions to the conversation. But starting off, we're from Bedside Productions, which is a queer porn collective in Copenhagen. I'm the co-founder. My name is Anne Sofie, and Hannah is our kink expert. And pain slut. Yes. Yes. And Bedside Productions was founded in 2018, and today we're approximately 20 people, a few more depending on what projects are happening at any given point. And we have quite a few different activities going on. Our main activity, of course, is the production of these films. And our goal with our films is to make a platform for creating films that break with the normal perception of what porn is and can be. So it can contain artistic ambitions that is not usually attributed to the porn genre. It can also be a way of telling the stories that are not usually portrayed in mainstream pornography, so giving room to extreme kink, to queer stories, to bodies that are not normally shown in pornography. And our ambitions are higher than what our filmography, do you call it filmography? Filmography portrays today, but we're going to keep on expanding in different directions. So apart from making the films, we are also hosting sex parties, raves, with a focus on making these sort of environments and milieux accessible to people who might not have that much experience going into sex-positive parties and spaces. So we put a lot of emphasis on the education on how to act and how to enter these rooms and how to support each other in showing up fully as who we are or choosing to exit fully as those we are. We also do educational work, like Hannah and I have been doing today and yesterday here at UKS, where we've been hosting a workshop in how to apply the BDSM framework to creative collaborative processes. It's also more straight up sexual kink education, and of course creating physical spaces where people can discuss pornography, sexuality, gender, and all things related. And we have a print magazine. Yes.
We do, what?
Which is community created, kinky, cute, fun porn magazine.
Very cute. Yeah, very fun. No, it's really, it's very
So we do very cute things also. And me, I'm Anne Sofie. I'm from Oslo, but I've lived in Copenhagen for the last 12 years. And my background is mainly in, I studied political science and project leadership, but I've worked as a CFO, doing finances. Well, I also do that now. But my background related to this is very much within sexual education and feminist activism. So I've been running feminist festivals, working with Sex and Samfunn in Norway, and various things. Also working a lot with migrant sex workers, street-based sex workers in Copenhagen. So quite different from this, but somehow all connected in my mind, at least. Yes. And then I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah,
because you do it better.
I'm Hannah or Cherry Velour, depending on where you're looking. I'm American, and I've been living in Copenhagen for a while now. But BDSM is just something that I've always I've been very lucky to have been led into an incredible community in Seattle when I lived there. I'm from New Jersey, but I lived there for 4 years in my adult life, my early adult life. And the things I learned from that community I found so incredibly valuable, not just as a kinky person, but just as a person. And so I've expanded from that, because when I left Seattle and I moved to Denmark, I realized, oh, everywhere in the world doesn't have these spaces. I didn't realize how lucky I was with what I had in Seattle, this really welcoming community that shares a lot of knowledge and is just, I mean, it was a very special place. And so I've been wanting to make it a mission of mine to share some of the things that I learned that go beyond the kink space, and share how we can use these practices outside of the dungeon, as well as, of course, literally kinky education as well, some dominatrixing, some sex work, some, you know, all of these things, a bit of it all, because I just love it. And I work as a video game artist in my day job, because you gotta pay the bills. Which also gives some interesting perspectives as well, like coming back into these things. Big time nerd all around. Mm-hmm. So, without further ado, that's a very brief introduction of me. Shall we talk about this bit of film that we just showed?
And I think you should just start, because obviously this film is very much based on Cherry Vilvour's personal, lifelong fantasy almost.
Yeah.
And I think you should start off by telling a bit about that.
Heck yeah. So I love this stuff. I actually, when I first came to do a project with Bedside, I was casted for a completely different film. And two of the people that were going to be in that ended up pulling out, and so we still had this whole team together. We were like, all right, well, what are we going to do now? And I was like, I don't know if we were going to be in that original film, I was actually going to be a dom, so that changed. I thought, okay, well, it's not every day that you have the opportunity to create a fantasy with people, some resources, like time allotted to build this thing that you may like dream about, or just like, the kind of thing you wouldn't necessarily build in your bedroom for a play scene or something like that. I mean, maybe. I know at least one person who would, but and I've always really been drawn to very brutal C&C, which is consensual non-consent fantasies. I love the idea of everything you saw, kidnapping. I'm a very big masochist. I think that masochism it's my form of mindfulness in a way.
And if there is any terms you don't know, then just interrupt.
Yeah, please
and ask us to explain.
Just say so. But I, big masochist, and I really enjoy being put in a space and really just like pushing my boundaries within that space. And through my years of experience, I became very comfortable with knowing my boundaries and communicating them. And so that was, we all felt on the team that this was something that we all felt comfortable in doing together after we got to know each other, had a lot of conversations, maybe more on that later. But yeah, long story short, I fucking love this stuff. And I feel incredibly grateful to have been given the opportunity to create something so intense and personal to me and my own fantasies. And I guess that's the short of it without giving too much away.
And how did we go from there, from you having these fantasies into this? Because there's a lot of planning, and obviously like everything that you have seen have been mapped out and planned more or less in detail in advance. So can you tell a bit about that process? Yeah, so the workshop that we've been doing while we've been here has been about taking the framework of BDSM and applying it to a creative space. And that framework is the negotiation, the play, and the aftercare. And so the negotiation, and especially in the case of this, for us has been this very long and thorough process of everybody, not just me and my main torturer, Louis, talking about our boundaries, but the whole crew together talking about our boundaries, what we're nervous about, what we're excited about,
what things we, just everything, right? So there's been a lot of communication as a team. There was also multiple practice play sessions between me and Louis to get to know each other's bodies, our body language, what worked, what didn't work, what we wanted to explore and expand on more. There was a couple very cute sessions at his family summer house, figuring out that piss device thing that we built and like mocking it up and stuff. It was a very sweet time.
And we also had a team building session where we built the entrapment.
Oh,
so all of us were part of that.
Yeah.
Frederick made the brand.
Yes, Frederick made the brand. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, and so it was a long process where we all the camera person. I mean, everybody was a part of this. It was from the beginning a team, and we also made it clear that unless we really needed to, we didn't want to bring anybody new in. Right? This was our group, and so yeah, it was a really beautiful process. And I think as well, because what happened was so intense, and if some of you heard me said at the beginning, it was 4 hours long of pretty much continuous torture. That kind of thing, for most people, it's very hard to be in the room for that and feel okay and feel safe. And when we talk about things like safe words and stuff like that, that doesn't just go for me, that goes for everybody in the room. Everyone is capable of saying, I need a break, or it's a lot for me, right? But we've all talked about it since and said, yeah, I felt so safe with the people in the room to also communicate their own boundaries, because of how much effort we put into before time, the negotiation.
Yeah. And we can say also, like, in all of our productions, like, none of our productions from earlier have been anywhere near as intense or sadistic as
soft
this
and
one.
sweet stuff.
Quite soft and sweet stuff. But we always have something that we call an emotional fluffer that is part of the film production. Are you familiar with the term fluffing? Yeah, so a fluffer, that's someone that keeps the dick hard on set in pornography normally. And we have an emotional fluffer that is there to kind of facilitate that these conversations take place and to keep in focus on that everyone is able to express it if something is going slightly off track or we need to check in or anything along the way. And the emotional fluffer for this one was Kate, that was in the box.
Yes.
Yeah.
She wasn't there the whole time.
Yeah.
That was the only thing simulated in the film, is that she was not in there the whole time.
She's actually one of the people that is masked also.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so am I.
Yeah. May I ask, how did you physically prepare for this session? What did you eat? How did you hydrate? And
I mean, for any session, I try not to eat too much because then I feel a little sick. But I want to make sure, the main thing is you want to make sure you have enough sugar, like in your body, right? Because a lot of the time your blood sugar can go down during these sorts of things, and especially when doing things with needles, we often keep dextrose tablets around. And we did take a dextrose break at one point where I was like, I need sugar. I'm like, I need some sugar. Other than that, being hydrated, having enough water. But for the most part, I think the main thing is just those the play sessions that we had prior, just so that my body sort of knew what was coming, right? Other than that, though, I'm quite comfortable with intense paint practices, so I personally know myself, and I know I don't need a ton of ritual around preparing myself. But some people absolutely do, and that's a part of the process of learning yourself and what individual people need.
Although there was a moment where you prepped a bit in the beginning, because like in the beginning there's a little bit more performing, and then it quite quickly moves from performing into something very real.
Well, that kind of prep, yes. So, I mean, other than the food things, yeah, you mean with where I asked for a moment to, yeah. So in the very beginning, the very first thing that we did was film me in the back of the van. And you don't even really see it, but I'm actually like tied up, duct taped in the back of the van with just a GoPro on my head. And before that scene, I really, I wanted to be in the headspace because I'm not at all an actress. Like I don't act. Everything that you saw was very real. Of course, I'm in a headspace, you know, but it's all very real reactions. And so before I got in the van, I was like, okay, Louis, can you just beat me around a little bit so that I can get into the space? Just give me a few slaps and like give me a little headlock for a bit so that I can get into the headspace before I get in there. And that helped me a lot. So yeah, that's my preparation. Yeah.
I'm also curious, of course I've heard you talk about it before, but I think it's interesting also to talk about what the thoughts were about how this film would be received, and if there were any like hopes in what people would take away from experiencing this.
Yeah, well, because especially when I first watched it in a room full of people, I thought people are going to wonder what my political angle is, and which is a perfectly fine question. But the genuine answer is there isn't really one. I just wanted to. Of course, everything is political, and so it's not that it isn't political. But I also think that there is a lot of value and something as well very feminist about being like, I just wanted to make it. I'm not trying to say anything about like this violent act or this or that or like the male gaze or how I'm being portrayed and yada yada. If people want to extrapolate things, then they can. But for me, this is my fantasy. I wanted to make it. If there is anything that I would say I would want people to take away from this, and as well, if there's any goal that I would have with this film for people, it's to show that you can create something this brutal and this violent and do it with care and with an ethical foundation and do it relatively safely and do it where everyone involved feels safe and heard and cared for. And that really doesn't just go for something as hard as this, because you can wonder those things. You can wonder, is this person actually involved? Are they cared for? Are they being violated? About the most soft-core porn that you'll find on the internet. And so, of course, with these very violent things, those where our minds jump to, but I think we have to really be like, well, I can say that about anything. And the most violent of actions, something that looks as violent as this, can be one of the most tender expressions of affection and care and love. And a simple glance on the street from a stranger that's non-consensual can feel like an honest attack. And so that's one thing I really wanted to get across with this, is you can make something like this with love and care.
And I just want to add to it before, and we get to your comment, but I think that is also like an overall goal with what we're doing with Bedside, because the porn industry is notoriously secretive. Like most of the time when we consume pornography, we have no idea about the working conditions, not even who has made it, and I think that is really like the big chunk missing in this conversation, is that we need more transparency. We need to know how these films are produced, who's behind them. That's also why we mostly use our full names. I do as a producer. And also in regards to this film specifically, because it is such a violent film, if you just look at it outside of context, you are going to have a lot of questions, and it might be very traumatizing if you're subjected to viewing this without the context of seeing it in a space like this and hearing Hannah talk about her experience and knowing where it came from. And that discussion is very difficult, and I don't know exactly how to solve that. But what we're trying to do with this film specifically is to control as much as possible how it is being shown out in the world. So to keep a firm grip on controlling which platforms in which context it's shown. So mainly it's going to be shown in viewings like this, festivals and so forth. And then we try with our website, we try to add watermarks and other things that makes it traceable back to the Bedside Productions website where you can read more about how we produce our films. But you can't control that, it's the internet. Yeah.
But we do what we can.
We do what we can.
So I think there was some questions over
Yes.
here first.
I was just going to ask, like, with that context, and normally when you do a scene, in terms of aftercare, it tends to be quite sort of, not always, but often like one-on-one. But then when you are doing aftercare potentially for the entire crew, how does that work in the context of your production?
Yeah, so this is actually even one thing that we did do aftercare. I guess the short answer is you all meet up a couple days after and you have like an open and warm conversation talking about it and making sure everyone feels good and safe and eating nice food and just landing, right? Allowing everybody to land and decompress and digest it. And one of the things that we thought, oh, okay, you know, if we could do it again, we'd do it differently, is we didn't plan the day that we would meet before the film. So, which is not like...
It was more than a few days, it was like a week or two.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we all met up again.
And that, it didn't end up being a problem. Like everybody was okay, but it's still something I think is really important to have that plan set up already, so you know exactly when that's coming. So yes, but that's how I would do aftercare for a group, is just meet and know, okay, we're all going to check in together, we're going to have this nice time, and make sure everyone's okay.
And I think the way it was done was that you and Dewey, the main torturer, you had your little cute corner where he tended to your wounds and you were like hugging it out and
But the majority...
all this, and while they were doing that, the rest of us were decompressing over by the bar.
Yeah.
Not actually drinking, just
Standing
by the
there,
bar, literally by
physically
the bar.
by the bar. It's a venue that we did this at, so. But actually the majority of the aftercare was for me, was done by Kate, the lady in the box. So the next day, I ended up going home with her, sleeping at her place, and then the next day we just watched movies and ate snacks and popcorn all day long, and it was perfect. I was just like all like black eyes and covered in bruises and oozing brand and everything. It was just what I needed. Hold on, I think you had a thing earlier. Do you still have something? No. Oh no, Yvonne.
Me?
No? It's not to push you. I just thought I saw.
No, I just might have been something like that. But maybe I do want to just comment rather than a question very much on what you've been saying. That I think this shift in watching it with context shifts the gaze in a way that I think is really important and very political as well. And I think that is this also knowing and this political act of like making safe spaces and caring spaces for doing this kind of work is very important. So I think that, not that this helps me to watch it, but it makes a different experience of watching it, where the context is so vital for me.
Yeah.
So that's just a comment rather than a question.
Yeah, you were talking about the aftercare, and I was wondering why didn't you choose to show that in the film?
It's a good question, and it's because that's not part of the fantasy, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that in doing what we can with showing these things within the context, and the context of Bedside, having me here, I think that does some of that work, right? So, and at the same time, I really love when places like kink.com, a kink porn website, sometimes will show the aftercare and things like that. and that's really, really good if that's the point of what they're making as well. But for me, I wanted this to be my fantasy, and my fantasy doesn't involve aftercare. It's brutal and it's evil. But in reality, which is off the screen, for me, that's where they have to.
And like an educational aspect of that is also like pornography is not reality.
Yes,
It is a
exactly.
fantasy, and no matter how much you bring of your own sexual preferences or desires into it, it is still a performance.
Yeah.
It is still fake in the deepest sense, because it is not reality. But we have, however, shot extra material that will be released on the website also, which is in the form of an interview with you and who is the main torturer. That will be released also for that added context when it goes online. But it will not be part of the work. It's you and then Truls.
Yeah, I had really I'm sorry if I'm like not being able to formulate, but it's about the context and about consent that you talk about. You talk a lot about you want people to have the context, and you want to people to be aware that this was consensual fully. And for me, when I'm watching porn, it's a lot about illusion and about fantasy and about believing that the story is true, kind of. And I'm just wondering, do you have thoughts around this, how to create this illusion while having an ethical production and consensual setting? How does the viewer get to believe this story?
Yeah. I mean,
No, go.
Yeah.
I think we're,
Yeah. I mean, I feel, because I totally know what you mean. And that's why even when we talk about the context of, there's a little voice in my brain that's also kind of it's a bit of a devil on my shoulder that's like, oh, it's kind of okay to just see it. And just but I also, I think as much as I want the context to be available, I also think it's also why I take the app. I don't want aftercare to be in the work itself, because I want when you enter the work, it's just that, right? It's there, and I think it being on the Bedside website, that just gives you the background context in your mind that you might need to comfortably watch it, because you're like, okay, this is an organization, this is like a community that creates things that I can feel safe watching, and then you can enter the space. And I feel that film, I think, does a pretty good job from the beginning. No matter how much you know about the context or about, oh, there's extra material over there, whatever, you hear this whimpering and you're in this van, and hopefully it just takes you there. Hopefully.
and I think it's also very much about who creates something, because when people tell other people's stories, then what you're pointing to is often lacking. But when it is told by the people it concerns, people who have a deep personal connection and understanding of the subject at hand, there is reality that is incorporated into it, even if it is a fantasy and a performance. And I think with this piece of work, for example, I don't think anyone watching this will be in doubt that Hannah is feeling exactly those things she is expressing along the way, which would not be the case if it was me being tortured, for example. It would look vastly different and way more performative. I have made a film, and then that is more cute. Then it becomes a completely different kind of work that will not give you what you're kind of asking for here.
Yeah, because I actually think you don't need much suspension of disbelief, because it's quite real. Other than the fact that I'm not literally being abducted by people I don't know, but the experience and what I'm physically going through and my emotions are very real and raw with what you see. But yeah, it's a really interesting.
And then there's another layer to it also that we have discussed, and that we're probably going to do. We're probably going to make a version that is even more brutal, that is way less edited, with less sound design, that is just basically a documentation of the torture that Hannah endured.
Yeah.
That will look vastly different, because now you have the cinematic effects. You have the GoPro from inside the van, and you have these elements that shows the construction of this scenario.
Yeah.
If you take all of that away, then it is brutal in a different way.
Yeah, and in fact, that was actually my initial vision when making this, was something quite different to where it ended. I love where it ended, and where it ended is also absolutely the product of a beautiful collaboration of many minds, which is something that I also love about working with Bedside. Is I took something that is so personal to me and I put it in someone else's hands, and I said, now bring your own interpretation and your own perspective to this. So in my initial vision, it was much more just like raw, no music, almost, I imagine it being a film made by the torturers that they were going to show to their potential clients that might buy me from the black market, right? So something where it's just screaming, or it's white noise because the audio got cut, or something like that. And also it would be like at least 2 hours long. Yeah, it'd be really nice to make another version of it like that, because it does shift things, the cinematic kind of elements of it. But I also love it.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask a little bit about. When it comes to the references, because it deals with sort of like the what's come from this sort of like an illegal genre, which has become more and more accepted in popular culture and popular genres. How do you sort of like work with the genres, with the sound design, and do you have some sort of specific references in popular culture?
Well, for me, because I wasn't a part of the sound design elements of it.
You weren't part of post?
Yeah, I wasn't part of post at all. I very much just like put it out there and let the others work with it. But from the beginning, my biggest inspiration by far was, I talk about it all the time, was Insects. And Insects is a porn production company in America that was really big in the late 90s, early 2000s. Very controversial, really hardcore, INSEX, fucking gorgeous, genius, insane, like twisted stuff. And they would do like 2-hour films of girls being tortured in these incredible and like mind-blowing ways, and like horrible, ugly, grotesque. I loved it. I loved it. And so yeah, that was a huge inspiration for me. And as well, we also, one of the things that we did as a group was I showed the group, there's a very hard to find documentary about insects called Graphic Sexual Horror. And I actually have a reference to it on the t-shirt that we made for the film. It says that on the bottom. But in the documentary, it goes into what they are and what they do, but also shows some of the darker sides of how it maybe wasn't always so consensual, and in the sense of where a lot of the models felt pressured or people weren't treated very well. And so I wanted to take inspiration from this thing that I find so hot and genius and gorgeous, and also create my version of it that's done with care. Yeah, so that was honestly my main inspiration. And actually, I saw later, after we made the film, I watched the film Martyrs. I'd never seen it before. And I didn't realize, like...
The French one, or the US?
Yeah, the French one. Yeah. And I didn't realize, like, I completely look like I'm ripping it off. Because for anybody who doesn't know, it's this incredibly beautiful but also really grotesque French film with this, there's this like cult of people torturing women to try and get them to make this expression that's like where they're seeing the other side or something like that. And the face that I'm making when my eyes are rolling back in my head is like the face. And it totally looks like I'm ripping them off, but just same minds.
And I can say in the post-production, of course, because, I mean, this is a very, like, we have made this film with a zero budget. Zero. The post-production obviously also, that affected things. Plus, there were some, like, decisions made along the way that were made out of necessity, or like they were practical because of the framework we were working within. So we shot this on 2 different cameras. One we found down at my office, the surveillance camera, and then we had another camera that just looks too nice to be like a very grimy documentation of. So we have 2 different sets of images, one that fits in an art gallery with beautiful close-ups of Hannah's body and like stunning images, and then we have this really fucking dark, gnarly, cold, distant surveillance tape moving next to each other. So when we were in the editing room, me and the editor, we were also like, okay, this is going to be interesting. We're not going to be able to turn this into exactly what we talked about from the beginning. So already there it was kind of like, also if we wanted to be short enough to go online without it ruining us financially because of streaming costs, because to stream a 2-hour film on your website, that's going to be very expensive, and when you don't have good payment solutions like you don't do when you do small time pornography, there simply isn't like the capacity to host that.
Yeah.
So there were these practical considerations also. Unfortunately, but also fortunately, because I feel like the result is something that can do a lot of what we initially set out to do, but it can also do something else, which is to make it a little bit accessible for those curious and for those who might also need the slight distance, the cinematics of the sound design and the editing and the final result that it gives, because it does bring you a little bit further away from this horror scenario that you were imagining to start off with. Definitely. That's one thing, and then also that people were allowed to like bring their own creative flavor to it. So the sound design was made by someone who had not been part of this process, that is based in the US. So obviously there was a lot of back and forth with that and adapting, but there is like someone else's creative vision that is coming in externally, and then we're kind of like making it work together. So it's very much like collaborative. There is no director of this film.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm just curious about the reception. How do people receive it?
How do you receive it?
I mean, very differently.
Very differently. Yeah.
Some people leave, some people are really upset, but mostly I find that people are interested, they're curious.
Yeah. I mean,
and some people are super happy to see that their kink, their sexual practices are being taken into a room where it can be shown in daylight and talked about also with people outside of these communities.
I think it really makes people curious, especially shown with me in the room, you know.
Yes.
I think that really is an interesting thing for people, where they're just like, okay, I'm seeing this, and then I'm seeing this like lively, alive person who's like smiling and very happy to be here and everything like that, and it's very interesting to see. Some of the response that I got, which was very nice, was people saying like, thank you for sharing such a vulnerable space, right? I think that everybody feels that this is a very vulnerable space that they're being led into, almost to the point of it being uncomfortable, right? I mean, I wouldn't even say almost. It's an uncomfortable but very intense and vulnerable space. So it's made people curious about the things that happen in it. It's made people say, oh, I didn't even know that the body could do all of these things and be okay.
Some people have been surprised that it didn't affect them at all.
Yeah, and some people have been like, some people it also depends, some have seen it multiple times, and the experience that they have with it really changes every time they see it, and actually myself included. Especially, this is the third time I've seen it with an audience, and like the first time I was a little bit like tense, not because I was in any way ashamed of what I was showing or anything like that, but I was saying, oh God, this is quite intense, and I hope people are okay watching this, you know. And then The second time I was a bit more calm, and then this time I felt very similar to how I felt when we would watch it as just our little group, which was like kind of giddy and giggling and quite happy and like laughing about things that like, you know, just like funny moments in it, and I'm more and more comfortable with that. So I really think it changes every time you see it. Yeah, it's really interesting though.
How are we doing with time?
I don't know.
You're okay.
We're okay.
What's the time?
It's 10 past.
9.
Yeah.
10%.
Yeah, okay.
I have a potentially little silly question.
Give me your silly little question.
But
please.
what do you say when you come into work with all these new?
Funny enough, I and this is not a
Or
privilege.
did you like go on holiday? Or?
No. So this is not a privilege that everybody has, but I have made it important to me that any space that I exist in, I am completely open and honest about what I do. It's not that I'm pushing it in people's faces, but I'm not trying to hide any of it. So I'm very fortunate in that the spaces that I've been in, people have just learned to accept it. And I always make myself available for questions as much as people want. But like in my current place of work, the guys are great that I work with in my little game studio, so much so that not long after, when I hadn't even been in the studio for very long, I invited them along for a cute little hook suspension day. I invited them to come into the woods with me and my freaky friends, and they watched me do a hook suspension in my butt. I literally, like, my bosses and my lead, while I have 2 hooks in each ass cheek, and I'm swinging from a tree, and they're like pushing me back and forth. And one of them even, because then we did like neck pulls where we put one hook in our neck and we're all like pulling against each other. And one of them even tried one. So I was really lucky. But what I've found in general is that when you're open, but not in a way where you're pushing people, for the most part, people will be quite receptive, and they'll say, oh, okay, like this thing that maybe freaks me out a bit, it's actually not so scary when you present it like this. That being said, again, many people don't have that privilege, and that is how it is. And also many people may have that privilege but just choose to keep it private. That's not the case with me.
I also want to add to that, because that is something we deal with in all of our productions, because obviously that this is a specific thing that might provoke people more than pornography in general, but it is an area that carries a lot of stigma, and especially being a performer in pornography is heavily stigmatized. At least that is like the general perception in society. So since I've started doing this, I always, when I do Q&As or I come out into the world and talk to people about what I do, one of the first things I'm asked is like, how does your surroundings react to what you do? Are you open about it? How did your parents react? Are you afraid you won't get work? Before I had a family, they were like, what, are you afraid that no one will ever love you? You know, like, because people were worried for me. And I have to say that one of the things that goes into the process whenever we cast someone to be in one of our films is that the first thing that happens is that they have a conversation with me. And the first thing I ask is, how would you feel if people found out? How would you feel if your parents found out about this? How would you feel if your workplace found out? Do you have the support system that's going to be there for you when you decide to do this? And also, if you decide that you regret doing it, if you change your mind at any point, will those people still be there to support you? And do you feel confident that you can stand firm in the decisions you made, also with confrontation from your environment? And a lot of people who are curious and wants to work with us don't want to do it anymore after having that conversation. And that's the way it should be. Because there is no control, there is no way of being secure or being protected against these hypothetical consequences. I have to say though that from my experience, that is not how the world meets you. That is not like, I only meet that through people's concern for me. It's not actually how the world has met me since I decided to do what I do. I've also performed in films as well. It is a consideration that we take very seriously, and it's something we talk about a lot. I'm still not certain how real that threat is. I'm absolutely certain that for some people, the barriers and the potential challenges you will have to face from making such a decision are way higher, especially if you're marginalized in several ways. Funnily enough, those people who are marginalized in many different ways are often the first people to volunteer to stand at the forefront. So I see when I get casting requests, it is often queer people, it is people who have been rejected by society in many different ways throughout their life that have become brave enough to not worry too much about those.
Yeah, I think you learn that like the world's gonna decide, like make their judgment on you one way or another, right? If you're rejected already for this or that thing, you may as well just live your full truth if you can do so safely, right?
Yes.
Safety is always
Exactly.
a concern, right? But yeah.
I think he was performing it actually.
Yeah.
No, this is very quick, but I want to say thank you to UKS for
Yes.
putting this on. I can say this in this room, but I work for D&B, and I had due diligence done before I got the job, and even by the time I moved to Norway, the cat was very much out of the bag, kind of thing that I did back in London, and they were quite supportive, but generally speaking, I find Norway has some way to go, certainly with sort of gender norms, and so for me tonight, seeing this here was a very important thing, and very political to say, yeah, you can mix these elements, and I'm very appreciative to you, Miriam, for creating space for that, so I just want to say thank you.
I agree.